Good evening and welcome to our daily devotional reading. I hope you had a good Friday. Pun intended. Let's listen to Plato. Stranger. And when things having motion and aiming at an appointed mark continually miss their aim and glance aside, shall we say that this is the effect of symmetry among them, or of the want of symmetry? So remember, he's discussing the vices of the soul, which is disease, or when compared to disease in the body is called discord, and when compared to deformity in the body is called want of measure, and now also compared to missing the mark. Theaetetus, clearly of the want of symmetry. Stranger. But surely we know that no soul is voluntarily ignorant of anything. Certainly not. And what is ignorance but the aberration of a mind which is bent on truth, and in which the process of understanding is perverted beside itself? And what is ignorance but the aberration of the mind which is bent on truth, and in which the process of understanding is perverted? True. Then we are to regard an unintelligent soul as deformed and devoid of symmetry. An uninformed soul could also be said. Very true. Then there are these two kinds of evil in the soul. The one which is generally called vice and is obviously a disease of the soul. Yes. And there is the other, which they call ignorance, and which, because existing only in the soul, they will not allow to be vice. Theaetetus, I certainly admit that I at first disputed that there are two kinds of vice in the soul, and that we ought to consider cowardice, intemperance, and injustice to be alike forms of disease in the soul, and ignorance, of which there are all sorts of varieties, to be a deformity. Stranger. And in the case of the body, are there not two arts which have to do with the two bodily states? What are they? There is gymnastics, which has to do with deformity, the other translation has ugliness, and medicine, which has to do with disease. Theaetetus, true. And where there is insolence and injustice and cowardice, is not just chastisement the art which is most required? To chastise. That certainly appears to be the opinion of mankind. Again, the various kinds of ignorance, may not instruction be rightly said to be the remedy? True. And the art of instruction, shall we say that there is one or many kinds? At any rate, there are two principal ones, think. I will. I believe that I can see how we shall soonest arrive at the answer to this question. How? If we can discover a line which divides ignorance into two halves. For a division of ignorance into two parts will certainly imply that the art of instruction is also twofold, answering to the two divisions of ignorance. Well, and do you see what you are looking for? Stranger. I do seem to myself to see one very large and bad sort of ignorance, which is quite separate and may be weighed in the scale against all other sorts of ignorance put together. What is it? Stranger. When a person supposes that he knows and does not know, this appears to be the greatest source of all the errors of the intellect. True. And this, if I am not mistaken, is the kind of ignorance which specially earns the title of stupidity. The other translation has it as lack of learning, but again, it's a newer translation. They are trying to be, I don't know, politically correct. But the Greek also has stupidity. So if you think you know what you do not know, you're stupid. Diaetetus, true. That name then shall be given to the sort of instruction. What name then shall be given to the sort of instruction which gets rid of this? Diaetetus. The instruction which you mean, stranger, is, I should imagine, not the teaching of handicraft arts, but what, thanks to us, has been termed education in this part of the world. Stranger. Yes, Diaetetus, and by nearly all Greeks. But we have still to consider whether education admit of any further division. We have. I think that there is a point at which such a division is possible. Where? Of education, one method appears to be rougher and the other smoother. How are we to distinguish the two? There is a time-honored mode which our fathers commonly practiced towards their sons, and which is still adopted by many, either of roughly reproving their errors or of gently advising them, which varieties may be correctly included under the general term of admonition. True. But whereas some appears to have arrived at the conclusion that all ignorance is involuntary, and that no one who thinks himself wise is willing to learn any of those things in which he is conscious of his own cleverness, and that the admonitory sort of instruction gives much trouble and does little good. There they are quite right. Accordingly, they set to work to eradicate the spirit of conceit in another way. In what way? They cross-examine a man's words. When he thinks that he is saying something and is really saying nothing, and easily convict him of inconsistencies in his opinions. These they then recollect by the dialectical process, and placing them side by side show that they contradict one another about the same things, in relation to the same things, and in the same respect. He, seeing this, is angry with himself, and grows gentle towards others. and thus is entirely delivered from great prejudice and harsh notions, in a way which is most amusing to the hearer, and produces the most lasting good effect on the person who is the subject of the operation. For as the physician considers that the body will receive no benefit from taking food until the internal obstacles have been removed, so the purifier of the soul is conscious that his patient will receive no benefit from the application of knowledge until he is refuted, and from refutation learns modesty. He must be purged of his prejudice first and made to think that he knows only what he knows, and no more. Theotatus. That is certainly the best and wisest state of mind. Sophron of sound mind. Stranger, sophron. Two omegas. And the accent is on the first omega. Stranger. For all these reasons, Theotatus, we must admit that refutation is the greatest and chiefest of purification. And he who has not been refuted, though he be the great king himself, is in an awful state of impurity. He is unrestricted and deformed in those things in which he who would be truly blessed ought to be fairest and purest. Very true. And who are the ministers of this art? I'm afraid to say the Sophist. The stranger spoke there. He did not let Theotatus answer here. Theotatus. Why? Lest we should assign to them too high a prerogative or honor, the other translation says. Theotatus. Yet the Sophist has a certain likeness to our minister of purification. Stranger. Yes, the same sort of likeness which a wolf, who is the fiercest of animals, has to a dog, who is the gentlest. But he who would not be found tripping ought to be very careful in this matter of comparison, for they are most slippery things. Nevertheless, let us assume that the Sophists are the men. I say this provisionally, for I think that the line which divides them will be marked enough if proper care is taken. Theotatus. Likely enough. Let us grant then that from the discerning art comes purification, and from purification let there be separated off a part which is concerned with the soul, and of this mental purification instruction is a portion, and of instruction education, and of education that refutation of vain conceit which has been discovered in the present argument. And let this be called by you and me the nobly descended art of sophistry. So there is a noble line of sophistry. And there is our sophist Socrates. Theotatus. Very well. And yet, considering the number of forms in which he has presented himself, I begin to doubt now I can, with any truth or confidence, describe the real nature of the Sophist. Stranger, you naturally feel perplexed, and yet I think that he must be still more perplexed in his attempt to escape us. For as the proverb says, when every way is blocked, there is no escape. Now then, is the time of all others to set upon him. Now then is the time of all others to set upon him. True, stranger. First let us wait a moment and recover breath. Take a sip of tea. Yummy. And while we are resting, we may reckon up in how many forms he has appeared. In the first place, he was discovered to be a paid hunter after wealth and youth. Yes. In the second place, he was a merchant in the goods of the soul, or learning about the soul, the other translation says. But I quite like a merchant in the goods of the soul. It's so vague that one has no clue what it means. Theotetus, certainly. Stranger. In the third place, he has turned out to be a retailer of the same sorts of wares. Theotetus, yes, and in the fourth place, he himself manufactured the learned wares which he sold. Stranger, quite right. I will try and remember the fifth myself. He belonged to the fighting class and was further distinguished as a hero of debate, who professed their heuristic art. True. The sixth point was doubtful, and yet we at last agreed that he was a purger of souls, who cleared away notions obstructive to knowledge. I really like that. Very true. Do you see that when the professor of any art has one name and many kinds of knowledge, there must be something wrong? The multiplicity of names which is applied to him shows that the common principle to which all these branches of knowledge are tending is not understood. Theotetus, I should imagine this to be the case. Stranger, at any rate, we will understand him, and no indolence, nothing will prevent us. Let us begin again, then, and re-examine some of our statements concerning the Sophist. There was one thing which appeared to me especially characteristic of him. To what are you referring? We were saying of him, if I am not mistaken, that he was a disputer. We were. And does he not also teach others the art of disputation? Certainly he does. And about what does he profess that he teaches men to dispute? To begin at the beginning, does he make them able to dispute about divine things, which are invisible to men in general? Theotetus, at any rate, he is said to do so. Stranger, and what do you say of the visible things in heaven and earth, and the like? Theotetus, certainly he disputes and teaches to dispute them about them. Stranger, then again in private conversation, when any universal assertion is made about generation and essence, we know that such persons are tremendous argufiers and are able to impart their own skill to others. Undoubtedly. Next comes politics, but that's for tomorrow. Thus far our scripture of the evening. No soul is voluntarily ignorant. to know is necessary for survival, really, in many ways. Different levels of knowing, of course, and different types of survival. To know how to interact with the opposite sex is necessary for procreative survival, for instance. And so what's playing in my mind, but I don't know if there's anything in it, is this idea that, because I've always, because of Proverbs, had this, although I know it in my own language, the Bible, I don't know it in English, but I can clearly see when people misquote it, and that pisses me off. But that, letting that be. Knowledge, insight, and wisdom is the three things that go together in my mind. And insight and understanding, real deep understanding, seems to be connected. And it seems to me tonight as if that is some places where, maybe especially in our time, it goes wrong. We have all this information, which we assumes as knowledge, although if it's only stored on your phone and not in your mind, I'm not sure to what extent it's knowledge. But then understanding that and what it means, that's not a given that we would necessarily understand and interpret and have insight into the knowledge that we are given. And without that, without the insight, without the understanding, there can be no wisdom. At least that's how I see the three connected. Ignorance as a vice. Well, I love knowledge more than anything else, so I'm very open to calling knowledge a virtue, which will make ignorance a vice then. And I was also thinking about this refutation thing. And dialectic in Logos, at least how I'm used to practicing it. And the problem is, most of the people who do these things, except for Alex, is really nice. He's a kind young man, but he's not nice. There's a difference. And so there is searching together, but I'm not sure if we refute each other enough. And when I see conversations online where people say that they're in it with good faith and they hope to learn from each other, it is too often questionable. I know, like, I'm an expert in performative contradiction, which is not a good thing, so I'm not really bragging, although it sounds like it. But the only people willing to refute others often seem to be those who are so sure of their position. And not then from a stance of like, but are we sure about this? Shouldn't we look a bit deeper? But like, you know what? You are wrong and I can tell you why. That is most often the refutation that I see. Which is fine. And someone like John handles it pretty well. But others don't. And I don't know I'm not sure enough about anything to not be swept along with whatever wave crashes on me. I will probably rebel against anyone who approaches me outside of good faith, because I will get like a feeling. But that still doesn't leave a lot of options left for me to actually learn. I mean, I'm listening to John's the latest lecture series of John on the Peterson Academy, and it's extraordinary. The man is so good. I can devote myself to him for 30 years. Only I know I shouldn't, and he wouldn't want me to. I need to learn my own. I need to stub my toe myself. What was I saying? Oh, and then the things he says, I do take as personal criticism often, because he mentioned this performative contradiction, and I'm well aware of the fact, dearest viewer, you have no idea how performatively contradictive I am. It's absurd, and that's why it's okay for me. But I don't know if that's a good enough answer, or how long it's sustainable. I think I would rather be in this position, though. Joe just published something. I get pop-ups for only him. I'm recording earlier tonight because I have an appointment. In my mind, being devoted to dogmas is supposing that you know when you don't really know. I'd rather suppose that I don't know when I do. And be in utter confusion and completely lost. I have absolutely no respect for those who are not capable of searching outside of what everyone around them believes. I did read Alice in Wonderland today, and Robert something posted something on being in a madhouse, so hey, we're all mad here anyway. Let's embrace it, in the mad search for understanding. Last thing, one more thing I wrote down, because John also spoke about Alex O'Connor, and he was speaking of the New Atheist, and then he just mentioned Alex as a side note, and he was like, not Alex, I love Alex. I have no idea what made the boy change. I haven't watched it at all, like even close to all his videos. It's a lot. and he was quite annoying at certain points when he was young. But so I don't know what made the boy change. I'm quite curious. Poor thing. May the spirit of Sophia be with you.